for, in this case, the effective gross income. You can see what we did. Just simply the 175 minus the 26,250 plus the C38 or the 25,000. Right, see that? And once again, all we're doing is just following the very simple math over here on the far left. Okay?
Oh, shit.
All right, now, right below that, the 50,000, that's just being drawn from above, from cell B26. Okay? And then the next line, did as a calculation. So C39 minus C40. So the effective gross income minus the total operating expenses gives us our net operating income. And once again, you could have drawn that from above. However, you have to be careful about that because as we copy over across the page, we may have some issues there. Okay? All right? And then the annual debt service, that's simply, what I did was take B27 divided by B28. Again, more than one way to get there as well. Okay, and then lastly, at least for this column, the before tax cash flow, C41 minus 42. All right, okay, now, let's see if we can deal with the kind of copying over across the page and see what we've got to do to be able to kind of accomplish that. So let's go back up here to year 2 in terms of the potential gross income. So we get the 180, 250. Now, what I did, it looks like, is I think I potentially maybe even sort of hard-coded the B36 without even trying to copy it over, and I just probably retyped it again. But you can just sort of see that each year, as you sort of go over, you're simply taking the previous year times 1 plus the growth rate. Does everybody see that?
Should we make B36 static?
You could. That's actually what Kenneth's question was earlier.
Okay.
And I wasn't 100% sure how I'd set this one up. And in this case, I did not do that. I just actually just did each one of them by hand.
Okay.
Apparently. So yeah, it's the same all the way across, just simply make sure that you match up with each of those. Okay? Just give me a couple minutes to type those in. Now what you could do, matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and look ahead.
Which one do you have to make static?
You're going to make the B36 static.
Right.
So if we go, let me just do this. Okay, I'm going to get rid of these 3 just to prove my point. Okay, so for year 3, I could go over here, come on, and take that times 1 plus B36, okay, but go in and make the B36 a static cell reference. And if I do that, just like that, then I should be able to just take the bottom right-hand corner and copy over those last couple of years. Does that make sense? Okay, just to save a little bit of time. Sometimes I take the shortcut, sometimes I don't. Okay, as long as once again you get the right number, don't really care. Okay, now, year 2, same process. You're just kind of copying over from one year to the next with that growth rate. Okay, and so you can make the B37 static, copy it over.
Okay. Same thing with the
No, in this case it's B37 because we're dealing with the
vacancy rate.
The vacancy rate. Okay, so in this case, what we're doing is we're actually saying that we actually are applying a growth rate to our vacancy rate,
Right.
which we can make some arguments against that, for that, but I'm doing that to basically say the property has got some issues with some vacancies that are getting basically more and more vacancies each and every year, okay? Percentage-wise of income, okay? So in other words, what's actually happening, which is not necessarily a good thing, we've got a growth rate of income of 3%, but a growth rate in vacancies of 4%, okay? Not a good combination to have, all right?
Yeah.
But thankfully, our vacancies are still a small enough percentage overall that it's not going to be a massive impact, okay? Okay, everybody got that row?
Yes.
Okay, so the next one, this is going to be our other income.
Why did we have to fill in the 25,000?
Because in the model above does not have an other income line. I didn't choose to put one in there. And part of the, there's actually, you actually bring up a really good question, RJ. Okay, anybody want to take a guess as to why I didn't put other income in the model above? There's a reason.
Because you don't, no? Or you just budget, you don't budget for it, but it's very...
Okay, both of them is the right thing. So, Kenneth, you want to?
A lender will really consider other income as part of your NOI.
Uh-oh.
See, other income,
Never knew that.
if you remember, we actually talked about this, I believe, on the first day, which is that lenders in many cases are going to exclude that other income because it's not core income. Core income being rental income. And so as a result, you tend to kind of exclude it because it's more of kind of like, yeah, it's extra money, it's kind of like found money, but from the lender's perspective, they don't usually use it when we're making a lending decision. Okay, so that's the reason I excluded it. But then down here, I include it because we're partially more concerned about calculating rate of return.
Can you come back one?
So which one?
D36.
D37.
D37?
I know, because I can drag it over, but there's all the rest of the stuff. This one?
Okay.
Drag it to the rest.
Yeah, but when I'm dragging, it's...
Well, once again, if you're going to drag it over, you're going to have to make the B37 static.
yeah, I did.
Is mine coming off?
The year 5 is 22.
Make them all 37.
22.
Can you show the D36 real quick? And D37?
D36.
Please, right? Over subtraction, not adding. That's right.
No, these are growth rates. We're being added. Okay. All right. What else do I need to show there? Which one? Okay, I'm moving on because I'm not hearing anything. All right. Okay, so now we're down to C39. Okay, so C39 we've already talked about. That's just adding those up. Now, what you should be able to do for basically row 39, you should not have to do any static cell references at all. You should just be able to copy basically, whoops, all the way over. Once you've got the values of the C36, C37, and C38, you should just be able to copy over across the page to year 5 without making any adjustments to those.
No, D38.
Okay, D, what, I'm sorry?
D38.
Okay. All right. Moving on down. All right, so the 50,000, once again, we're pulling that from above for the operating expenses. So B26 is where we're pulling that from, and we're making the assumption that our operating expenses are going to grow at 4% a year all the way across. All right, so once we do that, we look at, whoops, same sort of thing. Take the previous year, multiply it by 1 plus the growth rate, copy it over. Yep.
Oh,
Look here, I put the formula correct, right? When I come here, the formula is correct, but it was here, the formula is I don't know what I'm, part of it, I'll just have to put it wrong.
Well, you're doing, C38.
One second, that was correct, this one.
Oh, that's because you're using, you look at, you're not changing the, see, you're using, using the road. You're using that road, not the road right above. Using the wrong one. C37. Well, you also wrote that. You're using C38, so C37. Okay. All right, so we've got all the way down to our other income, I'm sorry, our operating expenses, all right, 4% growth rate. Now, from this point, it should be fairly smooth sailing, all right? So we've got, now for cell C41, we're just simply subtracting out C39 minus C40, and then should be able to copy that all the way across to year 5. Okay,
Yeah.
so it should be pretty straightforward. And then in terms of the debt service, that's remaining constant all the way across. However, if you're going to copy it all the way across, you should make both of those static cell references. Otherwise, it's going to potentially copy over other stuff that you don't necessarily want copied over. Okay, and then for this last one, C1 or C41 minus C42. And then you should be able to copy that over. All right, so that should get you everything up to year 5, matching, all the way down to our before tax cash flow.
Can you show me your D42 real quick, just
The
to,
D42.
just to see something? Okay.
Yeah, what I did was I just simply said, okay, instead of making the static cell references, I just said, okay, copy the cell to the left of it.
Okay.
About the last column.
Yeah.
This one, the reversion,
Yeah.
we're not there yet. Okay, right now, all I want you to do is to get years 1 through 5 and match up 100% with years 1 through 5. And the easy way to see if you matched up completely is just to look at the bottom right-hand corner. And if that number is right, you can pretty much assume that all the others are right, because it all feeds into it. Okay? All right?
should we have the 1,520,000?
Nope, ignore this.
Okay, okay.
Nothing to see here, nothing to see. Okay. All right. Now, before we get into the reversion piece, let's go down to the cash flow piece. Okay? To this part of it. Okay, we're going to deal with the reversion here in a minute, and we're going to get to that, but I'm trying to kind of ease into it. All right. So, first things first. The first column here, equity invested 100%. What I'm doing here is I'm doing two different return calculations. I'm doing one that's 100% equity or an all-cash deal, okay? So this would be, you've got $1 million sitting in your back pocket that you can just go and throw at a project, not have to borrow any money from anyone, and what would be the cash flow associated with that and the return associated with that. Does that make sense conceptually? Yes or no?
Can you repeat it one more time?
Okay. Once again, the first column is assuming a 100% all equity deal, all cash, no borrowing whatsoever from anyone, and looking at what the cash flows would be from that strictly as an all cash deal, okay? No debt.
You got it,
Right?
Curtis?
The second column is looking at it as it actually is, based upon the model that we created, which is looking at it that we have invested 20% equity
Leverage.
into the deal. We have, in essence, then borrowed 80%, but we are looking at what the cash flows would be, because you're going to see these cash flows are smaller than these cash flows.
Yeah.
But the reason for that is because we have debt, okay, that we've got to pay off each year in terms of our annual debt service. And then you're also going to see that obviously the number that we originally invest, this $1 million represents the total price of the project. Because once again, we're paying everything out of pocket, no debt whatsoever, all equity. Whereas this, we're only putting out $200,000 or 20% in terms of our equity. The remaining 80% is debt. So the difference between the top number of $800,000 roughly is what? That's our loan amount, okay? Then for the cash flows, the difference between this cash flow and this cash flow is this cash flow is coming from our net operating income, which happens before, well, I have my model up here. Net operating income comes before annual debt service, okay? So this number is higher because you're not taking out anything for annual debt service. You're going to keep all that money that you would have been paying for debt service because you paid all the money cash up front. Does that make sense? Okay? So that gets us down to pretty much, cash flow for years 1 through 4. And you should be able to understand, look at the numbers from above and see kind of where those came from. All right? And we're going to come back to the reversion here in just a second. Let's go ahead and skip on down to the internal rate of return for the holding period. All right?
Yeah.
Here, this is what we, just like what we did on the first day of class in here, is just doing a simple internal rate of return calculation for that column of values. So the purchase price, the income stream of the net operating income for the first, basically, few years, and then in the final year, the 5th year, basically what we're doing is we're adding together the cash flow, the operating cash flow of the net operating income with our reversion. Okay, now let's talk about reversion. Okay, the reversion, in essence, is going to be your selling price of the property, subtracting out, if you have a mortgage, subtracting out any sort of selling cost, and that's what you have left over, okay, is going to be your reversion. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's take a look. Now, to get the reversion, though, we're going to have to talk about the cap rate. Okay, so let's go back to that. Okay.
You said the reversion was the selling price minus the mortgage minus the selling cost?
Right, if we have selling costs. But in this model, I don't think you even have selling costs. I think I just have mortgage balance. Okay. All right, so let's go over here for a second and see some extra little calculations I did. All right. First off, I did an extra set of little calculations for year 6. And this is a 5-year model, but yet I did this kind of these extra calculations for year 6. Anybody have any idea why I did those calculations for year 6? Yeah.
To compare what the internal rate of return gave you kept it a little bit longer rather than just selling it.
No.
Because to me, the NOI of year 6 to
Yeah,
the value
the
of
NOI.
year 5 for
Yeah.
yourself.
Okay. Right on target. Okay. So the way that you have to think about the income that you use to apply a cap rate to the value of a property is as follows. Where am I at? Okay. Once again, we think about our good friend Irv. All right? This income number in Irv, inherently the assumption behind that income number is it is the income that you are going to receive over the next year. Okay?
Right.
It's not based on past income, it's based on future income. Okay? And it's based on the next year's worth of income. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
Right.
Because we always look forward. We're not looking back in this case. And so we're trying to predict what is the income going to be for this next year. Well, but the value, this is the key, but the value estimate in this is what is the value to us today for that income that we would receive over the next year. Does that make sense? So in other words, let me make sure this is super duper clear. All right, so let's say that this is $1,000. All right, and we're generating a 10% cap rate or rate of return on this property. That means the value of this to us is $10,000. Okay, now let me just kind of walk us through the logic. I'm going to write a check to Gayon today for $10,000 for this investment.
Yes.
All right. At the end of a year from now, technically, she's going to give me $1,000 back. So to me, that is a 10% rate of return that I have earned on that investment over this next year. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
If you get 10,000 back.
What?
I was just saying if you get 10,000 back.
No, not 10,000. If I get the $1,000 back, that is 10% rate of return. In other words, I'm going to potentially do that for at least 10 years
Yeah.
to get back basically my original investment. But the idea is we're going to do this continuously from year to year to year to year. But at least upon just a 1 year time horizon,
Yeah.
we're simply saying that the annual return for this next year's worth of income is 10%. Okay. All of that to say this. If we're trying to find the value at end of year 5 on a property, we have got to look at the income over year 6. Does that make sense? In other words, we're just looking at it 1 year in advance. End of year 5, we want to know what the value is right now at the end of year 5, but we've got to know what the income is for year 6 in order to get that. If we're going to be reasonably accurate with our assumptions.
Right.
Okay? So, all of that having been said, I'm skipping over this piece right here, and skipping forward to year 6. So I just continue on basically with my assumptions over here to year 6 and do the calculations as I would have done them for the previous years to come up with a net operating income number for the end of year 6, which in this case is 143, 558, 82. Okay? Now, what is, in essence, the number or the value that then I'm going to potentially pop in here? Well, let's take a look at what we've got. All right? So come on down here. Let's take a look at this reversion. What am I basing that reversion on? Cell I-41 divided by E32. Okay, well I-41 is this. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay? But E32, let's go see what is E32.
Reversion cap rate.
Okay, here we go. The projected reversion cap rate, okay? And in this case, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, I kind of pulled that because it's actually an input, it's not an absolute requirement. I think I did it when I was just playing around trying to come up with something that might work and give me numbers I liked, but you can actually, that's an input cell, and so we're just simply saying, what is the rate of return that we would want on that income for our
Exit cap
for
rate.
whatever the cap rate is that we're going to have on the property. So in this case, I used a projected cap rate of 0.093946. Okay? Yeah, that one you can just type in. Okay? And so that is what we're going to then base our value on for the property at the end of year 5. So it's basically saying I'm wanting a 9.346 rate of return. Okay? Don't try to assume any sort of meaning to that right now, just kind of type it in. All right, so if we do that, that should populate oops, this down here, so the I-41 divided by E32, okay? All right, now the cell right below it, for the annual debt service. This is basically what we're doing here is we're having to figure out what is our loan balance at the end of 5 years that we have to pay off, what I was just talking about earlier, okay? That in order to figure out what our reversion is using debt, we've got to find out what our balance is on that debt at the end of year 5. So that's what the next line item down does. So this is just simply using the future value function to find what is basically the balance on our loan after 5 years. So you can kind of, you want to just go ahead and type those in. If it's not already typed in, I can't remember now. Did I leave it on your spreadsheet or not?
I think you
I did or did not?
You did.
you
Did,
did.
okay. I think I left a couple of things on there because I figured, damn, what the heck. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. And then from there, you're just simply subtracting out basically the debt from the total reversion. Now, also within that reversion number, okay, we're going to have to eventually add in the 139,325 to that final cash flow. Okay, in other words, the final year of the 5th year plus the reversion at the end of the 5th year. This is a question I think, actually, Eduardo had asked me about one of the quiz questions, same general concept, okay? That you've got to merge those two together. So, what you're going to see down below for the actual cash flows for each of those scenarios is the G41 plus the H41 for the first one. That's adding in the reversion value plus the final year cash flow of year 5. All right? In other words, the simple way to think about this is as follows. You own a property, each year you're getting income from the property. Okay? And so for the 5th year, just like any other year, you're getting the income that the property generated from rental income on the property. But simultaneously with that, in the year of sale, you are also getting the sale proceeds. So you just got to combine them together into one number. That's all you're doing. It's as simple as that. Okay? I mean, the example I used to give many years ago, and people, I don't know, they seem to relate to it. I don't know if they do anymore, but basically, like, assume that you buy a coin-operated vending machine that sells Coca-Cola. You spend the money up front for the machine, out-of-pocket expense. Each year, at the end of the year, you go to the coin box, you empty out the coin box, you count all the coins, that becomes your operating cash flow. And then at the end of 5 years, you decide to basically sell the machine to somebody else. That's your reversion. But for that 5th year, you've got to add the coin box collections to the amount that you're actually selling it for to someone else. That's all you're doing here. It's really that simple. Okay. Then for the equity one, same general process. You're doing the same thing, except here you're using the value that excludes the mortgage balance, and you're using the value that excludes your annual debt service payments. So G43 plus H43, all right? Now, once you've got all of that, okay, is everybody matching with the numbers here? Yes? Okay?
Yes.
Now, okay, so let's just talk about these numbers for a minute, what they mean, and then how we can potentially manipulate them. So, if I have hard cash currency, what am I better off doing? Paying cash for the investment or borrowing money for the investment?
Borrowing money.
Under this circumstance, I'm better off borrowing because I'm going to get a higher overall rate of return.
Right.
Okay? Now, but then also, it sort of depends on what are my other alternatives for investment. You know, if I've got no other alternatives for investment, you know, in terms of, like, for example, my next best alternative for investing is to sink my money into something that's going to give me a 5% return a year. Okay? Everybody follow me on this?
Yeah.
Which one would I be, assuming that I've got the full $1 million is my point. But assume that I have a full $1 million of hard cash currency, and that my next best alternative to this project is a 5% return on my money. So under that scenario, I would actually probably be better off going ahead and taking the all equity deal, because 20% rate of return on all my money is probably better than a 50% return on just 20% of my money, with the other money just earning 5%. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay? So there are, you know, sort of decision points that you've got to kind of think about it with respect to this. But, you know, another way to look at this, what if this project is easily replicated? But in other words, I could do 5 of these projects. If I could do 5 of these projects simultaneously, then that means I could use my full $1 million, if you will, because I'm only putting down 20% equity. So I could do that, put 5 projects, 20% equity each, and that would be $1 million of total equity. And I would be able to get a 52.6% rate of return over all my $1 million. Does that make sense? Okay, thus the power of leverage. Okay, positive leverage, not negative leverage. Okay, question?
Is there an equation for that? Kind of.
Yep.
What is it called? What's the model called?
Well, no, this is basically what we went over, I believe, last week. We talked about the weighted average cost of capital. Do you remember that discussion, or were you?
It was the first week, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry?
The first week.
Okay, first week.
Yeah.
So the weighted average cost of capital is basically looking at, in essence, the effect of leverage in terms of as you increase your basically borrowing. If you've got a low cost of borrowing, that's going to inflate your overall return on equity. And that's precisely what this is just showing you. Because here's the issue. What is my cost of debt under this model? 5%.
Yeah.
So if my cost of debt is 5%, that's going to have a pretty big influence on keeping that the difference. Well, so what happens, let's say we raise our cost of debt. We keep everything else in this model constant, but I go up here and I raise my cost of debt, or interest costs, to 15%. Let's just see what the flow through is. So we're going to have a fairly significant flow through. All right? Well, it's actually kind of screwing a lot of things up, because I don't really know that's a realistic thing, because that makes our site acquisition cost negative with that particular assumption. Even a 10%.
Why would your return go up if you're?
Well, it's, okay. I shouldn't have done that, and the reason why is, no. The reason why is because we've got a lot of different variables in play, okay? And just changing that one variable obviously influences everything else, and so we're going to have to adjust other things to allow that variable change to be relevant. Because by doing that, I mean, it's like for every little percent increase that we have, going from a 5% to a 6% interest rate, that's effectively changing, you know, what the amount that we can pay in terms of the site cost for the property. And so if you get high enough, like 10%, well, it's basically saying somebody should pay you for the site.
Oh, okay.
Have you ever seen one of those
Yeah.
scenario?
Yeah, the government does all the time. But you may have a local government that wants to see an area redeveloped, and so they will potentially, in some cases, actually give you the land to actually do the development. And so, yeah.
Do they expect a return themselves?
Not necessarily. And this gets into, these are much more real estate development questions, which I'm perfectly adept at answering, but my point being is they're more geared toward real estate development than they are the real estate finance piece.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and give a little bit of an answer. So local governments in many cases will try to spur redevelopment in areas that may have been blighted and deteriorating and so forth. And so sometimes they realize that the only way they can get basically development kicked off or stimulated is to do some sort of a market intervention, meaning that the government somehow takes possession and or ownership of key parcels of land or key buildings, and then tries to maybe clean them up, reposition them somehow, and then foist them onto the development community to say, okay, we're going to give you this land or this deteriorated building that has since been cleaned up, got rid of all the asbestos, all the contamination, all that other sort of stuff that you don't have to take on that as a risk, give it to the developer, and then the developer is able to come in and then take that and run with it. And in some cases, it allows the development to occur that would ordinarily never occur. Because, I mean, all of you have probably seen neighborhoods that you're just sort of like, I would never ever want to build here. I would never ever want to live here. I would never ever want to, you know, have anything to do with this. And that maybe at one point, you know, in time, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, you know, 100 years ago, it was a vibrant area, but it's not anymore for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
And so local governments realize that. And part of their role that they can take on is to say, we want to enhance our tax base. And so one way we potentially can enhance our tax base is maybe taking possession of some of those properties, and they usually do so in the form of what they're going to call maybe a community development corporation or a, I'm sorry?
CRA.
Yeah, community redevelopment agency. You know, there's a lot of different, you know, terminology that they can be called, but the idea is they take possession of the properties and then try to reposition them, okay? And so they will, like I said, partner with developers. Now, once again, there are usually strings attached to those sorts of things. That usually they're going to limit what you maybe can do with the property, or how long you have to own it before you potentially can sell it, or what kind of tenants that you may be able to put into the property. You know, a whole list of different restrictions. You know, once again, you know, the whole thing, they're giving you something for nothing, but at the same time, they want something very probably specific in return. Okay? But their whole thing may be, I don't know, affordable housing. I mean, that's a very common government goal, whether it's at the local level, state level, or national level. Affordable housing is a big thing. And so while you, as a developer, are maybe more than happy to take that free piece of land off their hands, or that free, you know, dilapidated building off their hands, you might say, that's not what I want to go with. Affordable housing in this particular location maybe doesn't make any sense. What maybe does make sense is a new hotel, or a new office building, or a parking lot, or whatever it might be. But the local government is saying, no. We want affordable housing, so you're going to be potentially, you know, if you're going to accept that, you're going to have to provide the affordable housing. I'm not saying that that is necessarily a bad thing, just saying that it's a restriction.
Yeah.
From your knowledge, I know like in West Coast there's a lot of rental controls,
Yep.
apartments that you can like, you know, so the prices don't go up for a
Yeah, I mean, New
period.
York is probably one of the most notorious for that, and the East Coast is New York City specifically.
We don't have any in Florida, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right?
Not that I'm aware
But
of.
that would be the same almost as affordable housing?
Yeah,
What? What did you say?
Rental control?
it's different. You can have sort of, you can, not necessarily rent controls, but you can have like Section 8 housing or
Projects?
other government
Projects?
subsidized housing that you may be required to, like, for example, a common thing would be, all right, the local government gives you this land or gives it to you at a very low cost, and then they will say, you must provide 20% of the units or 25% of the units as affordable housing units, and then the remaining 80% could be market rent.
Right, like when we say land use cost, for example. But the rental control is not the same.
Yeah, rental control is a bit different. Rental control is where you, as an individual, executed a lease with the landlord at some point in the past, and whatever the day that it was executed, it stays that way basically forever.
Yeah.
And then once you die, or once you leave, then potentially it goes back to being a market rental, okay? And so this is why, like, I mean, actually, use TV show, the TV show Friends, the whole idea was that they were living in a rent-controlled apartment for one of their relatives that had passed on, and but that was the reason why they were able to afford that really nice apartment, because it was rent-controlled, okay? And they were actually living there under the guise that it was the ownership of basically one of their relatives. Okay?
That would null and void the, like, death doesn't.
It should. But my point is, the landlord has to know about it.
Yeah.
You know, there are all kinds of games. I mean, you could probably find all sorts of instances of where the original leaseholder, you know, or the original lessee died, left, whatever, and then the subsequent tenants, related, maybe unrelated to them, took it over as a rent-controlled property and continued to live there for years without their property owner ever knowing it. Okay. Yep.
So Professor, so in this scenario, right, if I were to be walking in as a developer to a CRA, looking at that negative 13,000, that would be something that you would kind of like reach out for like an incentive or something?
Yeah, well, to a certain extent, but basically, I mean, it's a good number to sort of use there for a second, because you're basically saying to the local government, not only do we want you to give us the land, we also want you to give us an additional $13,000 in other incentives in order for this deal to work for us under these conditions. And see, that's actually a really relevant question, because you as a developer, to a certain extent, whenever you do these sort of deals with the local government, you're going to have to open up your books to a certain extent. In other words, they're not just going to take your word, for, okay, I need to, be given the land, and you're going to have to show them something like this and prove, okay, here is, what my actual costs are. Here is, in essence, yes, I am going to. It's not an issue that they're going to deprive you of a rate of return. It's that you're going to have to demonstrate why, and that it's a reasonable amount, and so forth, so on. Okay? Something that they can feel comfortable with justifying to the public as a whole. Okay? But yeah, those sort of situations happen all the time. Matter of fact, football stadiums, are a big sort of public-private partnership kind of activity. As are a lot of parking garages, as are, I'm trying to think, once again, I already mentioned about affordable housing. I mean, even in some cases, some shopping centers, because there are like some locations that maybe are food deserts, and meaning there aren't really any grocery stores within an area, and so the local government says we really want to try to ensure that everybody has access to fresh food and vegetables and that sort of thing, so we're going to incentivize a grocery store to actually locate here that ordinarily would not locate there because they wouldn't deem it to be economically viable. Okay, but that gets into the more public policy kinds of things that, once again, this class we're not really overly concerned with.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Other questions? So let me put this back to normal. Okay, I think everything from that point now is back to, yeah. Okay, double check. Yep. Okay, are we good? Any questions before we start the little quiz? Okay, no other questions. Okay, let's do the little quiz.
We don't need the implied cap rate, right?
Oh, let's take a look at it. Okay, in this case, the implied cap rate is B27 divided by B31. So B27, let's take a look at that, is taking basically the net operating income divided by B31, which is the overall project cost, okay? So that's what the implied going in. Actually, this is a good, I'm glad you brought that up because I should actually explain the difference between a going in cap rate and kind of basically terminal cap rate, or in this case, I'm calling it what am I calling it? The projected reversion cap rate. You're going to hear people refer to the cap rates as, like I said, a going in cap rate, which means the beginning of the project. You're going to hear about the terminal cap rate, or also, as I said, was called the, what's the word I just used? Reversion cap rate. So either the terminal cap rate or the reversion cap rate. So beginning of the project is going in cap rate or beginning cap rate. The end of the project is the terminal cap rate or reversion cap rate. Okay? Now, the difference between the two is that obviously one is based upon the first year's worth of income. The other is based on, once we calculate it, like the 60 year or whatever the terminal year is. And so now this is always kind of an interesting question for people to think about. You've got a little bit of a spread there, but not much of a spread. But you're saying at the beginning of the project, your cap rate is higher than at the end of the project. Does that potentially tell us anything? You could interpret it a couple of different ways.
Higher value related to the NOI.
Okay? You could also interpret it, I mean, think about, okay, just ignoring everything else. High cap rate means what? Higher risk. Lower cap rate means lower risk. Okay? So, in one sense, we could sort of interpret this. One interpretation would be, at the beginning of the project, we've got a higher risk because our income is sort of uncertain over the next 5 years. But at the end of all of this, maybe we've got a better handle on what that income is, and I think that's actually how I purposely came up with the lower cap rate. I was wanting to use that as an explanation point. So that what basically I'm saying is at the end of this project, we've got a 0.5 difference in what that cap rate is, and it's due to, in essence, we're saying that at the end of the project, it's basically less risky. And so we want to sort of use that whenever calculating the terminal value. Okay? Make sense? Which actually inflates the terminal value a little bit. Okay? All right. Other questions? Let's see if I can find a quiz. I can't imagine that you could possibly get any grade less than 100% on this one, but we will see. We will see.
We'll be surprised.
I'll find a way. I'll find a
approximately.
Yeah, just give me a few minutes after everybody. We should be done in a couple of minutes.
All right.
I'll try to keep the last bit a no number zone.
It's gonna be so hard for you.
It's hard for me. Okay, we got all of them? All right, well, I'll give you credit for that.
Thank you.
All right, is it everybody? Yes, no? Okay.
Cash. Do you have any minutes?
Okay, is that it? Final last call. Okay, all right, so we got a little bit of time left over, good thing. I will be letting you go a little bit early, but just hang with me for a few minutes. Wait till we get everybody else back in the room, and I've got a few things we want to talk about. So if you want to grab, if we're standing in the hallway, grab them and get them back in here.
I seen your family video. Oh, you saw that? With your email and picture.
Yep, all you need to do is take this impression, multiply it by 0.7.
Yeah, we come on in.
And then, put within the cell that is the cost of your construction. So the cell is right below this, you can multiply it by that by 0.7. On the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So, in other words, the cell here would have been the 6246, and then multiply that cell, whatever it was, times 0.7, and that would have been the answer. It would have given you that as your construction cost. Okay, Everybody back? We're missing somebody. There you go. We're missing over here. Who is that? Jesus. We got Jesus back. The sooner they get back, the sooner we'll get started. We're finished. Where are they?
Where's the?
That's it?
Well, who's over here? This is,
Diego?
Yes.
okay, give him a minute. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do now, I can talk about some non-class stuff since we're basically done with the class thing. We can talk a little about mentorships, we can talk about some of the other things, and so obviously for those of you that were in the program, for the last half of the term, I sent out the announcement about selecting your mentors, and hopefully by now, those of you that selected your mentors and I gave you your, hopefully one of your top choices for the mentors, tell me about what's happened since then.
I've been in contact and we're getting together this week.
Okay, who was it?
Friday, Steven.
Okay, Josh.
Gosh, yeah.
Okay.
I met Jessica Jolie Friday.
How'd it go?
Very good, actually. I went to the actual stars. She asked me where you wanted to meet. I said I actually want to meet in your office. So I want to see the development, how the whole thing works. So I went to Styles. It
Okay.
was pretty cool.
Any insights from it?
Yeah, we talked for a lot, getting to know each other a little bit about what I do, how I want to get the best out of this program, and how she can help me. And next month she's supposed to take me to like a project that they're doing maybe, so she can illustrate kind of like visually of how everything is working.
And she comes into our real estate development class and helps us out with a whole number of sort of site visits and information. Styles has always been a very strong supporter of the program and has been really helpful in getting us some really awesome site visits, and she has been instrumental in helping with that.
Yeah,
So,
she was very informative. Yeah,
she's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, who else? That's it?
I contacted Tony. We are scheduling the first.
Okay, so you haven't had your first meeting yet?
No.
Okay, anybody else? RJ?
Yeah, I met with
Harry Posen?
Harry, yes. I met with his
Okay,
office.
so tell us a little bit about it.
It went well. I guess we just went over like what was on the packet, just like goals and stuff like that, and just, I don't know.
So any insights from him?
As far as,
Just anything?
yeah, no, I mean, he gave me, I guess, a lot of good advice. We're meeting up again next month.
It was really influential, that the swap analysis you gave us there, kind of like to make notes of those 4 things. That was really helpful. I filled it out and I took it with me.
Yeah. The reason I wanted to talk about this a little bit, because this, in my mind, is one of the key components of the program, if you take advantage of it. It's one of those sorts of things that, yeah, you can go through the whole program, never have a mentor, never get in contact with a mentor, never, go through the process, but it is an amazing opportunity if you take advantage of it. I mean, these are all senior level people within the industry, and in most cases, they, some of these folks have been in the industry for, 30, 40 years, others are a little bit maybe younger, but the point being is they've got experiences that they're wanting to share with you and wanting to potentially help you out and make connections within the industry and to help you, kind of figure out the best way to kind of, point you with regard to what it is you want to accomplish. And so you really, 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 I mean, I know you're potentially stretched for time. I mean, you've got obviously your classes you're taking, you've got your jobs, you've got your families, you've got all that sort of stuff. But I really can't, help to, or I really can't stress how important I think it is that you connect with these folks and try to, get that extra little bit of assistance in terms of, in some cases it may be as simple as they point you in the direction of people that are going to be perfect for you to get to know based on what it is you want to do. If you go in and you say, I want to develop, industrial property in Miami, chances are that mentor or one of the other mentors is going to know precisely who to put you in contact with, and as opposed to you maybe even trying to have to figure it out. So, use them in that respect. I mean, what they're not meant to be used for, however, is you're not meant to go and ask them for jobs. That's not their role in this. Their role in this is to provide advice and, counsel about, kind of your career and your aspirations. And also I would say, don't be afraid of reaching out to them, you know, on a continual basis. They'll let you know if they've had enough of you, you know. They're not shy people. And you know, there are a lot of type A personalities within the group that are, you know, definitely you know, going to be very blunt about, you know, what they think you should do or shouldn't do. And so you should, once again, take that advice and run with it. But they're all great people. They've all, you know, agreed to, you know, to spend the time working with you. And so all I can say is make sure that you take a look at the manual, make sure that you reach out to these folks. Don't leave them hanging in the sense of you know, wondering, are you ever going to contact them? And then also, I suppose the other piece to this is that, you know, if you do meet with one of them, and for whatever reason, you feel like there was absolutely zero connection that took place and you never want to see them again or whatever, for whatever reasons, let me know and we'll get you assigned to somebody else. But, you know, don't just kind of abandon the situation and not say anything about it. Because, I mean, once again, these folks really are genuinely interested in helping out. So any of you that may have been in the program a little bit longer, I know, you know, Gayon, you've been in the program for a little bit longer, and I know you've had maybe at least maybe one, possibly two mentors. I'm not really 100%.
Just one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who was your mentor? Was it?
Trella.
It was Trella.
Trella.
Okay.
But then I moved. So I moved away, and our second meeting was at the YOLO meeting
Gotcha.
last year, and
Okay.
and he was going through some personal things, and I was going through some stuff. So it'd be good for me to reconnect again.
Okay.
I moved back.
All right.
So
Anybody else? Okay, obviously, Dustin.
Yeah, Harry Boson has been a great mentor. I've met him a couple times, usually for drinks down at 401. He buys. That's good.
Even better.
And just a little bottle of scotch with him and talk about things. But he was also good at getting in touch with a few people. Like I just so happened I was trying to get in touch with somebody at Minto, which is a home builder that Harry used to run.
right.
So I asked for a contact there, and he said, "We'll call Michael Bank with the CEO." I hired him. He'll probably take your call. So. I mean, I knew you know somebody, but it's
CEO.
That's something.
No, Harry's an amazing guy. But all right, anybody else? Other? Yep.
I had Craig Perry.
Craig Perry.
Yeah, so it's been good. I know
It was.
at least once a month we usually meet
Good. Did you
over
meet
at
him?
Sunwest
I didn't meet
or
him.
his commerce center.
It's really cool.
Cool guy, very informative, very knowledgeable.
I like him a
on
lot.
A lot of things. And I learned a lot from him. Really. But it's just like, I don't know, now I've been with him for so long now, well, a whole year now, that it's kind of more so we don't really talk on the more like, I guess the format
Yeah.
of what we're supposed to, you know, but that's for sure.
Yeah, and once again, these things, you know, potentially can take on, you know, different lives of their own in terms of how they, you know, get structured over
Evolve.
time. But, you know, the general idea, as I've said, you know, it's really meant to be a career enhancement opportunity. You know, is the idea behind it. Just, you know, trying to figure out ways that they can, you know, hopefully offer up advice and insight. Okay. All right. All right. So one of the other things that we probably, I think there's a handful of you that are going to be going on the Cuba trip. So we're going to have an information meeting about that on Monday night at 5:30. I think upstairs in 3048, I think it is. If there's anybody, I think we may still have one space available for the Cuba trip. It's going to be December the 11th to the 15th, and the cost that you've got to come up with is $500. Okay, the actual cost is about a little over $1,000. But if you want to go, we still, like I said, I think we still have one space available. All the rooms this year, just so happens on the ship we had an upgrade. So they are all exterior rooms with windows. So they're not the porthole, or not the interior rooms, they're like closets. So that's going to be taking place. So if any of you are interested in that, please let me know, and I'll get you on the list. Let's see. Obviously in the spring, we're going to talk about the spring study tour that we're going to try to do during spring break. And that one, as I said before, we're going to make that all inclusive, so you're not going to be out of pocket for any additional cost on that one. And then I was trying to think, RJ, are there any other events coming up in the short term that anybody should be going to, the networking events or?
Check my calendar real quick.
I think you emailed us a sheet.
Oh, yeah, I did last week.
Okay.
Yeah, he emailed everything there,
Okay, good.
with all the events in there. So.
Yeah, make sure that you take advantage of those. I mean, it's it's one of those sorts of things, you know, whether, you know, you're like me and you don't like to go out and talk to people, that's fine, but you know, you sort of need to do that at this point in your career to, you know, obviously get to know some of these different folks and hopefully, once again, you know, through those connections are able to help move your career along. So, you know, definitely consider those. What else have we got going on, RJ?
Well, next week, or the coming up week, there's not really any events, but the one after that, we have, a big one is the South Florida Idea Exchange. That's a 2-day one. On the 15th.
And that's the one with ICSC, isn't it?
Yes, and for those who I emailed about ICSC membership sort of a deal, if you email me back, I got you free admittance to that. It's $125, so. So if you're one of the 5 people who email me back, you got.
Can we still email
I
you?
think it was Diego, Dara. I can't think off the top of my head.
Huh?
Ed, did you?
Can I email you now?
It's too late now. But that's a big one, and that's on the 15th and 16th.
And also, I mean, RJ and I are going to be going to what is the Home Builders Conference?
Yeah, it's in January.
Yeah, so if those of you that are interested in the home building thing, and it's actually in Orlando, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would strongly, I mean, while our program is not really focused on single-family, you know, home building, the National Association of Home Builders Conference is amazing. There are very few conferences I like to go to because I don't like people. So, you know, this is one of those conferences that I really, really like because it's all about the product. I mean, and it is amazing. I mean, it's just like so
When is it?
many different. It's
January, I think 9th off the top of my head.
I think the January 9th is the first day of coming back though.
Yeah.
Also, on top of that, when I sent out like a little 1-question survey type deal,
Yes.
home building, if you answered, we're just finishing up the paperwork essentially, but you're now members of the National Home Builders Association, so you get discounted rate to that.
It's really, and when I say it's about the product, I mean, it's every possible conceivable, like everything from faucets to roofs to flooring to all different kinds of insulation and materials. I mean, it's just, and then built up, you know, they actually build things on site. I mean, it's just, it really is a very interactive, interesting, and it's massive, okay? It really is. I don't want to undersell it. It's one of those, if you've really got any interest in home building or residential construction, it's well worth going. It really is. Okay, anything else, RJ?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of the top of my head.
Okay, any other questions from any of you about anything? Are we all good? Good? Okay, so for this class, before I forget, so obviously next week, we've got the construction spreadsheet that we'll be doing, and so what I've decided to do for this course, there are a total of 8 class sessions, and so to kind of help you out a little bit, I am going to drop your lowest quiz grade in this class. So instead of having 8, you will have 7, okay? So just so that you kind of keep it in the back of your mind, so that it gives you a little bit of a cushion if you didn't perform well on one, that you've got a little bit of something to kind of fall back on, okay?
Last week's quiz, if we got it, I heard the answers that we gave you.
Yeah. So I'll be giving you the final version of that
Okay.
in terms of the graded version of that. And then, so maybe like next week, what I probably will do is then give you what your current average is so that you are kind of
Like a
clued in
midterm
on.
grade kind of thing?
Well, there's no midterm in this class.
I mean, like in 4 weeks, 8 weeks
Yeah,
kind of
something
thing.
like that. Okay? All right.
Don't give my.
Get out of here. Go home.
Did you want this? I'll keep that.
I don't remember off the top of my head if you emailed me that. I think you did though. I think you did. I'll have more information. Yes, I think so.
Okay, well, that's just one miss. I honestly don't know. I know that there are always opportunities out there, but I don't know. I would still contact them. Because I actually had somebody come over about something else. And he's always going to look at Lewis, before you, so how did all the contacts go with like SEBA Group and the others? Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I appreciate it though, because I'm just like, I don't want to do that. But I don't want to go fast. But I like it. I want to go. But I like it. I have not been doing one.
You made it too like you can decide if you want to
No.
come in.
Oh, you know she's right. Like, but you started to class.
This is your last one?
Yeah, I got that email. I was about to open it up.
Yeah, no, for also supposed to be an email too.
Hold on a second. So sorry.
For knowledge, you guys know.
Actually, it depends. It depends on what you want to do. You can go and not sign up for a class, you can go and sign up for a class. Then yes, you can. But the information session, if you email me today, I'll send you the don't worry about it for the next week. It's gonna be 5:30 to 7. Yeah. No, you don't. Unless you want credit for it. Then
Well, I do. Okay, so I need an internship credit. You said
For birthday.
you got a choice. You gotta figure out what you want to do. If you want an internship, you want internship credit, you gotta sign up for the internship. If you want to do the cruise and get credit for the cruise, you gotta sign up for the classes. You can't do both. You can do either the cruise or the internship. I am not requiring you to sign up for class to do the cruise. Yes. Yes. But show up on Monday. But yeah, send me an email so I can reply back to it.
Go to learn finance or investments.
Okay, okay. No, I was saying like, hey, I don't have any problems up there. So
Yeah, sure. The one, guys, mira, te voy a decir, mira.
that was the thing like that. I just in case I was to reach out.
Alright, good one, man.
Hello.
Mira, Ray,
No, man.
quisiera que habláramos con él.
What you got?
¿No crees que vaya? ¿A querer? No, no feo.
Right.
They had called.
¿Qué dice de referral fake?
They had called. Nobody's related yet. My mother, I guess she's getting it, so. Oh, by the way, you have to move all your stuff out of the room. My mom was not doing that. Yeah, okay, that's good.
Okay.
So that's why I couldn't meet up with him. Like, I was in a panic that night or the next day.
Gotcha. Yes, sir.
Actual answers to the quiz. If I do the problems out myself and I email it to you, will you email me back to let me know if I did it correct or not? Just a simple yes or no, doesn't have to be the answer.
I mean, I can give you some more time because I'm gonna have to stay here to upload the video. So if you want some more time to work on, then do that.
What room are we meeting in?
I think it's 3048, but let me just,
Oh.
let me see.
Thank you, Professor, I appreciate it.
What's your email address that's not pulling up on my thing? Is it D? Oh,
Yeah, DS434@msu.org.
434. Just DS434?
Yeah. I just emailed.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm sending it to you though. Okay, let's see. Files.
You in the military profession?
No. No, that's just from the barbecue place down the street.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
Is this from the first class?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I did abominable in the first one. I did good.
Are you gonna drop all those quiz grid, like?
Well, that's why that you do the test, is then that replaces the,
Oh, they don't have that option.
right.
Gosh.